Welcome to the EW podcast. I'm your host, Eric White, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Reverend Janice Hitchcock. So just a quick bio about Janice before we get started here. Reverend Janice Hitchcock is a social scientist specializing in human sexuality, trauma recovery, positive psychology, and community integration. As the daughter of a retired aerospace engineer and descendant of a long line of American civil rights activists, abolitionists, farmers, and explorers dating back to the 1600s, she has grown up in the unique position of immersion in our country's history while participating in the development of the technologies that will guide our world's future. Janice is a classically trained vocalist and djembe drummer, and she is currently researching her master's thesis, The Drum Calls You, Becoming a Djembe Drummer, a Qualitative Study. It's on the formation and external verification of identity, as well as the healing and unifying effects of African drum culture. It's quite a bio.
Right. Well, it's been an interesting life. So I find it kind of strange that it ended up being that they asked me when I went to get my degree in sociology to write about myself, because that was never. I started my my career in college at 42, 2 weeks after I became a grandmother.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes. Yeah, so I raised 4 humans to adulthood. I was really hardcore in my scholarship. I wanted to get human development just right, so I made a few.
Nice. So you put your own education on hold so that you could be fully focused on raising your children.
I could see why people would say that, but raising my children was an education. There is no degree that I will ever attain that's going to have the hardcore requirements of motherhood. The constant questioning. I mean, if you raise children who are allowed to be honest with you about how they see the world, they're going to reflect back things about you that you really might not want to see, right? And so they prepared me in a way for my scholarship when I came to university, because I was already used to questioning myself and making sure that what I was doing was in line with reason and science.
Interesting.
Which I thought coming to university was going to make me normal in the space.
What do you mean? What do you mean going to make you normal?
The first time I sat in on college classes, I was little. I was like on daddy's lap, 2 or 3 years old. And it was very, this is the early 70s, very different. The academy that I expected was something like that, because it wasn't just like my father would go to classes. He would go, sometimes he would just be a guest and go sit in on different people's classes. And then after that, everybody would get together. There was a community and socialization that happened outside of just that business that allowed all of the different disciplines to really talk things out. And I expected that to be how it was when I came to college, and it's very much not that way anymore. I mean, I find bits of community, but that solid community of scholars, a lot of them, especially the ones that I have learned the most from, kind of have their heads down right now, because it's really easy to get yourself in a great deal of trouble.
I was going to ask why you think that was, if it's a result of increased specialization of social media, but it sounds like you think the loss of that sort of community that you first encountered with your father is because of the social justice issues of the day?
No, not entirely. Not entirely, because I do think that specialization out into little silos where they weren't having as much just conversation and discussion of each other's scholarship. I do think that was part of it. There was also the transition from, it used to be that professors' wives did a great deal of the community building and connective networking kind of work that happened in the academy. But now those are jobs. You know, those are jobs that are done by students or volunteers and things like that, but not in the same way. You know, it's a job that's by its nature temporary, as opposed to something that's being built by people that are in a community where they live. Like the university is more of a neighborhood than a place that people just go.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense to me, where whenever it's the wives who are involved in those types of community building things, you know, the professors have tenure. They're there for a long time. The wives are involved in those types of communities for a long time. It becomes more of part of their lives, as opposed to having those types of things outsourced to students where you're getting turnover. Who knows how long they're going to be holding that job. And it's interesting.
Yeah, well, and they tended to be scholars themselves.
Okay.
You know, a lot of the founders of my current field, sociology, their wives were philosophers. Their wives ran the salons where people were coming together. I mean, these weren't women, you know, fanning themselves on their couch eating bonbons. These were, you know, intellectuals as well. So they were invested in the learning of their husband's students. I mean, it's just more of a partnership kind of thing that occurred. And I think some of those things, when they transferred to being a job instead of a part of someone's vocation, that it caused an unexpected shift. And also, if you had, you know, say there's a professor who's socially awkward because he's on the spectrum, he's a, you know, engineering professor or something like that. He's not really good at interacting with humans. Well, a lot of the times those kinds of people are introduced to a partner who's very good at interacting with humans. And they can serve as a go-between, both between like the student that their husband just couldn't understand what their problem was, and knowing their husband like nobody else on the planet would, and serving as that kind of, you know, just translator.
Yeah. That's exactly what the word I was thinking, like interpreter, translator, intermediary. That's interesting. Yeah, I was as soon as I said, I was like listening to myself speak about wives having this role, and I was like, oh man, we're already getting into this weird.
We're already going to get killed. Already, that's it. That's right.
But that's so I guess a little background. I have more questions about who you are and your journey. But I guess for the listener, some background and some direction about where this is headed today. This is our first time meeting, actually, right. But I was introduced to you through the Unity Now movement, and more specifically the podcast, which I was volunteering with for a while. You appeared on the Unity Now podcast. I loved what you were saying. I found you to be very interesting and reasonable. And so I followed you on Twitter, and I don't use Twitter often, but when I do, you're one of my favorite takes on there. I think you always seem to come down on the side of where I feel is right. And so we got into a little discussion on Twitter about pronouns recently, and right. I wanted to have you on. You've been on my short list of people I've wanted to have on since watching that podcast. So it's awesome that we can finally do this.
Thank you. It's really odd for me. If it wasn't for Western civilization collapsing, I would put a camera on my computer. So, and now I'm actually doing the interviews for my thesis as a series of podcasts, right? Because it is about forming identity. And I think something that's missing in a lot of the Twitter arguments that we're seeing is the fact that it's not just how we self-identify, it's also how those around see us, right? And that part of really solidly integrating anything new into your identity is both forming that identity and how that occurs, and then having that identity verified. You put it out on the world. You say, this is who and what I am, and then whatever that is, whether it's I'm an engineer, well, there are things you're going to have to be good at to demonstrate to everybody else that you're an engineer, right?
Yeah. I also, do you have more to say or no? Okay. I was just going to say, I had a thought. It was actually something I was thinking about earlier was before trying to come up with some questions for this was what you were just talking about in terms of how other people see you, but then there's another layer of how you see other people seeing you, right? So there's like this insecurity that I feel gets tapped into some of these marginalized groups, and there's good reason, I guess. We're kind of getting right into the weeds now, I guess, but specifically thinking about the trans community or people who feel as though they were born as the wrong gender. That's a horrible situation, and I have incredible sympathy for that. But I wonder how much of the uproar we're seeing now is a result of insecurities that come from that situation, or is it? You have a psychology background, so what's your take on how insecurity plays into the things that we're seeing today, and is that take accurate, or am I way off left field?
Well, I don't remember a time where I didn't know trans people, because one of our neighbors when I was a little girl in San Diego owned a trans bar. So there were all sorts of different trans people around, because of course back then it was more differentiated, because like you
what do
said,
you mean? How do you mean?
When you said trans, you're like, well, people who believe they're the wrong gender or the wrong sex. But that isn't everyone that we're currently calling trans.
Right. The definition of trans has widened.
It's like we cut off all of everything that goes after the word trans, because there are people who enjoy dressing as the other sex or find sexual gratification dressing as the other sex. There are people who are gender nonconforming, and they prefer to go back and forth between, how they express themselves as the world, or masculine and feminine. I wouldn't see any of those people as being the wrong sex. They're just different variations of their sex, right? I don't think that butch lesbians are not women. I don't think that effeminate men that just happen to like having makeup on and sparkly clothes, I don't think that those men are less male than other males. They're just different in some other way, right? But a lot of those people are being lumped in with people that have true, sexual dysphoria. people that are deeply uncomfortable with the body they're in, to the point that it's preventing them from functioning in the world. And that's a small percentage of this marginalized group. And one of the reasons that I'm so mouthy about the transgender activists on Twitter and places like that is that I'm afraid that it's those people who are so different that they don't have a large group of support or a large amount of people that even can understand their experience. That when the blowback comes for whatever it is that their activists are doing, that it's going to be those most vulnerable people who are going to face the brunt of it. And I do not want to see that happen.
Yeah. It's kind of the same. I mean, I've heard this argument in places or heard similar things in terms of race, where it's a lot of, white people who are calling for defunding the police. But if you go poll black neighborhoods, they actually want better policing. So
Right.
It's like these loud groups kind of hijack the movement or the narrative. And I always say this, I imagine that it comes from a place of empathy and wanting to be a force of good in the world. But I don't know what makes them not realize that, I don't know, is speaking out of turn a good way to say it, or I don't know. It is unfortunate.
Well, and a lot of them don't really understand the process. But there's this big push to start just actively physically transitioning children who are gender nonconforming. Just having other people identify them as trans, and then, that's just, they're kind of pushed into that identity. I've seen a lot of young lesbians being pushed either being told that they're bigots because they don't want to have sex with people who have penises, or if they're extremely gender nonconforming, they're suddenly being told, well, maybe it's because you're not really a woman. After all of these decades of the fight that, you're born gay, there's plenty of evidence that you don't just pick up being gay in high school. It's not like you don't just choose to be like that. Like I choose to be a drummer. It's not, that's not the same. I don't see it as any different as my drive to be attracted to exclusively men. That it's just natural. There's lots of biological evidence that it's related to different chemical exposure and environment in utero, right? Which is very different from what we're classifying as the trans community, right? And some of the people that are being pushed into the trans community and classified that way are actually intersex. So they're the people that, for whatever reason, are biologically a bit of both, right? And that's actually a much larger population than the actual transsexual people or transgender people. It's much more complicated than the people who have a very quick answer.
Yeah.
Tend to think.
Yeah, and I'm realizing that, I know so little. I would love to have a trans person or someone who's in this sexual dysphoria, dealing with that sort of problem on the podcast to talk about it, because, it's a hard thing I tried to imagine what it would be like to not feel as though I was the right gender. And it is a hard thing to imagine. It's almost easier to imagine what it must be like to face racial discrimination. It's impossible to know exactly what it's like, but it's really difficult to try to put yourself in the shoes of not being the right gender. I have no basis of understanding or way of knowing what it's like to be a woman, really. I can
Right.
think about what it is to be a woman, but I can't. What I think is probably
Feel.
so far different from what it actually is. And then to add in the layer of, okay, you're a woman who actually thinks they're a man. That's like, it's so hard to create that sort of feeling in yourself. So it can be a little difficult for a cisgender male to fully embody that in any meaningful way, whereas I think, as I said, with something like race, you can imagine what it's like to be discriminated. Again, you're not going to nail it, but it's a little easier to put yourself there.
Well, I mean, there are definitely people that hate you for the color of your skin. Whether or not there are systems in place to help those people out, the people exist, right? It's kind of strange that we're currently arguing about the fact that men and women differ, but we are also simultaneously saying that races are fundamentally different as well. It's like those two things don't go. It can't be that way.
Yeah.
Both of these things cannot be true simultaneously.
Yeah. Well, I do want to get into how you became interested in this topic, because, like you said, you are very vocal on Twitter about specifically these matters of biology and sexuality. And maybe I can just tell you where my interest is in it before giving you the floor. So I guess my interest in it comes from being concerned for children and specifically young boys growing up. I just feel as though in today's culture, it must be, I'm 31. I grew up without social media, without all of that kind of external pressure. But we value sexuality very highly in our media. It's something that we're constantly bombarded with. And boys at the same time are told, you must have consent. There's like this really big threat of punishment for boys who step outside the bounds of what is considered consent, which is, I'm not here advocating for no consent sex.
Right, but the goalpost has moved.
The goalpost has moved. So there's that pressure. And then there's also the pressure of now what happened with the Me Too movement of men are bad. So boys are getting this message about sexuality. They're also getting this message about men are bad. And then now they're getting this message where it's like, oh, you don't have normal male desires or wants. You should turn into a girl. Or I don't know. It just seems like there's so many messages that young boys are probably being bombarded with that makes it extremely difficult to grow up and to actualize and to be a confident and secure person in your identity now. So I guess that's where my interest comes from. That's why I was eager to talk to you, because it seems like you have this a little more studied than I do. I just am a guy.
No, and in part, what I'm doing in my interest is because of that. And I have 4 children. One of them happens to be a heterosexual white male. And I have my 2 grandsons who are 9 and 6. And I think about how difficult it is for them to be able to just find their space in the world where they can be, active, contributing members of society, which is exactly, what I want and what they want. And shortly before Me Too became a big hashtag, I came out as a survivor of sexual assault on my campus. It was something that I had worked myself into. I had done a lot of work at the community college in relation to rape culture and human sex trafficking. Some of my international awards are from that work. And I had worked to have other people tell their stories, but I hadn't. If I'm going to end up being famous, that is definitely not the thing I would want to be famous for, right? There's any number of reasons that I don't need that to be the first line on my bio, right? Because obviously there's other stuff that goes on my bio. But we had an event where people could come and they could tell their stories. And I felt like, I can't ask other people to do that if I'm not going to do it.
It's very brave.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was on a panel with a professor who taught the sociology of family violence, was actively involved in the domestic violence shelter there. Another one of my wonderful colleagues in student government. We put this together. We worked very hard, and we had a panel and did this. And then I felt empowered that this was something that I could just say. That I didn't have to
your
hide
experience.
it.
Your
yes,
experience.
my experience. Okay. That this was my experience. This was just something that had occurred, that had shaped my life, it happened on a college campus when I was younger. So there's I got a 26-year gap year that occurred. This had a huge impact on my life. And at first, that's how it was. It really was that, because I go to a women's university, there were no classes where I was the only one that I knew about, right? And so it really was I could say this was my story, and somebody else could say me too. Because one of the reasons I finally decided to speak out about that was because I was doing my work on rape culture with my friends, which has very much been weaponized, but I was doing that work and I was in the kitchen talking to my son. And he said he was having trouble with the 1 in 4 statistic, and 1 in 4 women by the time they are old enough to have graduated from college in the United States, which is actually a really low number for the world. We're actually doing a pretty good job at only 25%. And it's 1 in 6 men, by the way, too. This isn't just a woman thing. And he was saying he had trouble believing it because he goes, Mom, I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody that's been raped, so it's hard for me to believe that this is true. And I was like, yes, you do. And, ironically, 4 women who had been raped had just been in the kitchen, not including myself. And I realized that my silence on the issue was really part of the problem. That part of the reason people couldn't believe the stats was because they didn't know. They didn't know because that is not what I want people to consider about me. Not at all. I mean, I'm not ashamed of myself because of that, but not allowing people to incorporate what's really going on in their lives into their identity.
Becomes almost like a roadblock. It's a
roadblock. Yeah. It's like
yeah.
A lot of people say, well, you could get over it. It's like, well, who gets over unprocessed trauma? regardless of the trauma, who gets over that. And it was, Me Too really was that space where this can just be a thing. This is a part of our lives and we deal with, and this sucks. And let's work to make this, we can get that number lower, right? We could have some really serious conversations about what's going on, have better guidelines for boys and girls, being able to identify predators, because most of the genuine predators, that's not a majority of men. But as we all can see on Twitter or in any other thing, you don't need a large population to cause a whole lot of damage, right? And at the moment, it really is, we're in that strange space where we can't talk about it as men and women generally. And you can't really, for a man to even ask questions about these things, even if his true motivation is understanding, there can be a huge amount of blowback. I've seen men get shut down for just asking legitimate questions. And
what kind of questions? Like what happened sort of questions, or where's the line? Is it more about, are you referring to questions that ask a woman to divulge details of her experience, or is it more so whenever a man wants to understand where the line is? What is bad behavior? Where's the blowback coming from? Which kind of question?
I think that one is probably where a majority of the men that I've talked to about this subject seem to be getting problems, when it's surrounding consent and how that works. Because one of the things, I came back to college to become like the next Dr. Ruth. I wanted to be a sex therapist, help people have, healthy sexual relationships. That was kind of the goal, right? And you can't do that without having genuine communication, right? But at the time, at the end of my undergrad, when I left the field of psych because of this, in large part, there were other reasons, but because I was no longer allowed to gender my research on sexual dysfunction. I knew that was going to be a problem going forward. I was never going to make it to a PhD in a field studying human sexuality if I was going to have to pretend that male and female humans are the same, especially when it comes to sex, because we're not. And men really do feel more comfortable when they're in spaces where they have clear guidelines. And just because of the nature of our differences, women being able to just open up and divulge, oh, well, I find you incredibly attractive and I would consider having sex with you if that's not quite how humans work. I mean, there's a little bit more of a dance.
Yeah, some subtlety. It's not.
There's subtlety and there's nuance in there when, the options that were being presented at the time as what everybody should be telling people about consent was that you needed to have ongoing consent. Like anytime you were going to change anything about what you were doing sexually, you had to stop and you were supposed to ask, is this okay?
Yeah.
Is this okay? Is that okay?
So unrealistic.
It is unrealistic. I think about that and I'm just like, I wouldn't be having sex with that man.
Yeah. I've heard, I've been working closely with Greg Ellis on his podcast recently. And, I think he was talking with Warren Farrell, perhaps, who was talking about how we were sending mixed messages to men in that regard, where women want a confident man who is going to be confident in himself, take action when necessary, and do these things. But then at the same time, I forget if it's an actual law or some college or university in California or something, you have to like ask for consent to hold a hand. Like you can't make contact without asking for consent. Well, it's like you can't have a confident population of men and also tell them that they have to ask for permission to do everything. Those are contradictory things. It's
right. And there's a huge difference between some man taking my hand and some man drugging and torturing me. Those are not the same. Those are not the same things, right? And I started having a lot of fights in class where people were starting to say that, well, a man told me that I had a nice butt in Starbucks, and that is sexual harassment. That's sexual harassment. Well, no, it's not. No, it's not. The boss who says, you want to keep this job, right, honey? That's sexual harassment. But there doesn't seem to be any degree, right? And I see a lot of men just are like, I don't even know. I don't want to be on dating apps. I don't want to go date because no matter how good their intentions are, there's that fear that they're going to be, who wants to be branded as sexual predator? Especially for something like that. If it really is, if you have a bad date, like Aziz, I'm sorry, lousy date, look at all the damage that happened to he was at the height of his career. He was getting ready to escalate in his career. And then, one bad date. I haven't seen anything of his lately.
He actually came out with a special that I believe Spike Jonze directed and shot. I think it was on Netflix. I forget the name of it, but it was really good. It was really real. It wasn't even comedy almost. He was kind of just talking about society and about his situation. And it was really heartfelt and sincere. And I felt for the guy. I wish I remembered more of it. I might have been smoking weed at the time and can't recall all of it. But
I'll have to watch that.
It's really good. Yeah. Well, I want to get more into that stuff. There's a specific, I know you asked me to send you stuff to look at, and I didn't think of this specific story until this morning. So I want to get into something specific in a second, but I want to first dive more into your past. So how did you become interested in these topics? You're the daughter of an aerospace engineer, right? So how do you go from that sort of, what did your mom do? Was she involved in biology, psychology, anything like that?
No, my mom's a total normie. She was home when I was really little, and then she went to work for a bank, and then she worked for restaurants. But she's not a scholar, but
So where does it come from?
Have unconditional positive regard, it's because of her. There are no bad people on the earth as far as my mother is concerned.
I can think of a couple, perhaps.
I can think of one or two.
Well, how did you go from that type of parenting or those parents' careers in your upbringing to being interested in such topics and having such strong opinions about biology and sexuality?
Well, I spent a lot of time. My parents didn't really go places where I couldn't go. So when I was a little girl, when Dad was getting his pilot's license, I learned how to fly the plane too. And when they went out on whale watching trips or things like that, I was there. Or if there were, intellectual discussions going on, there were places that we went. My dad actively sought to make sure that I didn't have bias because of lack of exposure when I was little. So he set up kind of an exchange program. He, being an engineer he worked for General Dynamics at the time. So he was on the military base, and this is during the Vietnam War. People were coming from all over because this is a pretty niche field and they only care about skill, right? So when people would come over from other countries to join the project, as they came in, we would go over to their house and have a traditional meal. Me and their kids would play together and talk about, our lives, different things, different animals, and whatever. And I was allowed to ask any questions about their religion, where they were from, all of that to the parents. And we would flip it. And the exact same thing would happen. So it would serve as kind of an exchange program. I would learn about other cultures. Plus, we lived in San Diego, 2 blocks from Balboa Park. I went to the zoo every Sunday for silver dollar pancakes. And
that's where I live, by the way. I'm in San Diego. So,
yeah, that's where I was until I was 7. We moved out here to Texas. And so that novelty and wanting to understand people that were unique. I mean, I wasn't, having a neighbor that owned a trans bar. It wasn't as if I was excluded from talking to those neighbors. They were just neighbors like every other neighbor, right? But I also went to different places. My father got invited to go to a Black Panther meeting because of the nature of stuff that he was doing. And he took me because he wanted me to understand that there were people who hated me for my skin. And not only that, but to teach me how to be the sort of person that would be invited into spaces where I'm an out-group member for some reason, to be able to be welcomed into spaces. Be the type of person who would get invited to dinner, so that you could have real conversations with people who, wouldn't in the normal course of events even have conversations. So doing that on Twitter is not nearly as surprising.
Yeah.
But
it's also a little less welcoming, probably.
Also, there was a computer in my house when I was born.
Okay.
Dad built one from spare parts from the base. They encouraged engineers to tinker.
I just have something on my mind that we have to back up. Okay. You said your father was invited to a Black Panther meeting because of the nature of what he was doing. I imagine that has nothing to do with being an aerospace engineer.
It doesn't have anything to do with being an aerospace engineer. He also he was also involved with other projects for the government. So, we had there were a lot of special forces soldiers and things like that just kind of hung out at the house. And one of those people was involved with the movement, and he felt that my father was misunderstanding some things and their conversations about what was going on with race and stuff like that. And he's like, I'm going to need you to come. I'm going to need you to come see for yourself. I need you to come in, see for yourself, and have real conversations in this as my guest. Because that is the thing. There's a difference between being an interloper in other people's spaces and being a guest. Right? And So yeah, to the best of my recollection, it was because he was making sure that my father had a more accurate understanding of what was really going on. Because it was a pretty volatile time generally in the United States. And so
Wait, are we talking about the 60s or 2020?
this is yes, exactly. It's similar but not the same.
Do you feel as though, why do you say similar but also not the same? And I would imagine that it's similar because there are tribes, teams, but maybe not the same because, I don't know, this might be nostalgic or wishful thinking, but it seems, when you look at history, it seems like the causes of the 60s were much more just and classically liberal, I guess you would say, than the ones today. Is that accurate, or what were you referring to by similar but not the same?
Well, not only that, but obviously, I mean, you had the Black Panthers and you had other more militant groups that were really feeling like there were problems that it was going to take violence to fix, right? And you think about, I mean, why the Black Panthers even came into existence was pretty much white men of very bad faith, the worst among us, would be able to go into Black communities or minority communities of any kind with relative impunity and commit crimes against their families, and then there was nothing they could do. So the Black Panthers kind of came forward as an internal police force, and so there was that legitimate concern, right? And by the same token, you had the people who wanted to believe in that republic that the Constitution speaks of, but we still aren't quite living up to our best selves, right? You saw this with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and they're going after each other because Martin Luther King was like, no, there are good people, and we are going to work with the good people, and we're going to get together, and we're going to be our better selves, right? That it wasn't just about recognizing the Black community, but he wanted everybody to be experiencing their best self and coming together to unify as a country. I think right now, the right and the left, and along racial lines and all over the place, there are a lot of people that are going into the burn it all to the ground mode, right? And I think that a lot of that is happening, especially with young people, because they don't understand that not just the history, but if we start fighting amongst each other in the United States, we have plenty of enemies that are going to be very happy to take advantage of that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
One thing growing up around military bases will teach you is we have enemies who will take advantage of our weakness, right?
Yeah. It's a nice bubble here until it pops and people can, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I would be one of the few people who would really even have the ability to truly empathize with Gen Z and millennials when it comes to the tech, because I grew up with the tech. And I told the very technically minded people that releasing this stuff to the general public wasn't going to work out like they thought, because they thought the internet is going to come up and we're going to be sharing science and the best information, and everybody's stuff is going to get better, and we're all going to have this clearer image of reality, and the whole human race is going to be lifted up by this greatness, not reality TV and cat videos.
Yeah. I got no beef with cat videos.
I like cat videos.
Pretty innocuous. Yeah.
However, so, I've had the opportunity to see this coming. I've had, all of the computers, from the Trash 80 and the Commodore. I've used every single version of Word, including WordStar.
WordStar.
WordStar is the precursor to
Gotcha.
the very original.
Okay.
I learned to program BASIC at Tarrant County Community College the summer before I turned 11. I took a class with a bunch of computer engineers to learn to program BASIC.
Wow. That's cool. So you really have been at the, your lineage and your own personal experience has really been intertwined with progress in certain ways.
Yeah. Well, and it's really been my lifetime, right? I'm 50, born in September of 1970. So all of these changes that have been going on that we're dealing with have been going on. It's like this. Yeah. I've had a front row seat.
Yeah. So it must drive you. I mean, you're a very reasonable, level-headed person who seems to see the world with the nuance that is there. You haven't been captured by any specific ideology. It seems like, is that a result of your parents exposing you to, or your dad specifically exposing you to these various cultures and peoples? Because one of the things I had a Rome historian on the podcast before, Dr. Edward Watts.
I watched that interview. Those are really
thanks. Yeah,
very interesting.
He's great. He's coming out with a new book next month, actually. But one of the things that he said that he thinks, this was before the election, we were talking about, are we in a fall of Rome moment? And he was saying that he believes something that would allow us to escape this moment is a sort of exchange program where someone from New York City, say, has to go to Alabama and vice versa, and you get to see all these different parts of the country. So I'm curious if you think that your exposure to different ideas and to different people is responsible for your ability to see things with some level of clarity.
Yes. I do think that is essential, and I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it so late as they can go. They can travel on their own. I would do it much earlier, because it looks like we develop our preferences for phenotype. We recognize our in-group members by sight when we're really little, while we're still infants. And so if you are having your infant children constantly surrounded only by people who look just like them, their in-group members are more likely, that's going to be their go-to in-group member, looks like this, right? But if you have a rainbow of people, if you have, a bunch of different cultures, you live in San Diego, like going to the San Diego Zoo all the time, there was always some kind of thing. Zulu warriors came there. People would come whenever there were new animals. People would come from, that wherever in the world these animals came from, and you would, have that cultural, connection and experience. I mean, it was really young when I figured out, skin color is a stupid way to judge character.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just, Martin Luther King was more poetic about it, but it's just bad. Those things do not correlate in the way you would want them to, right? So it wasn't just about how I was with other people. It was for myself. to be able to have that accurate view of the world. I do think if I wasn't encouraged, and my dad had a network of people. I mean, I had, the kids now have an internet. I had my dad. If I had questions about something, he found an expert to answer my questions, whatever they were, and I think we do need more of that. And that's what got me into the drumming. Actually, I was drug kicking and screaming into drumming, but
oh yeah, now you're
oh yeah. I had a incredibly beautiful, loving being who sat in the front row with me in my classes at TWU when I was getting my psych degree. And she was a dance instructor for an African drum class. 6 months, I was complaining about the lack of community integration in the United States and why we can't talk to each other, why we don't have spaces where we have a possibility of redemption, all of these things. And she's like, you should come to this African drum class. You should do this. You're going to find what you're looking for. You're going to find what you're looking for here. And I was just thinking, what about me makes you think that I want to go do something badly in front of a bunch of people who do it well? And then you want me to dance? Are you out of your mind?
So what did you find? It sounds like something, if you're still involved with it.
Well, I decided that I decided, look, maybe she sees something I don't. Right? I highly respect this young woman. I know that her intentions are nothing but to the good. And so I'm just going to have faith in her, and I'm going to go and do this thing. And it did not take very long for me to figure out that she was right. She was right. That falling into time with each other, that absolute synchrony, that what drummers do for the community to tie together and bind the different kinds of people in the community together in these ritualistic ways. That
because of the dance that goes along with it, are you referring to because I'm trying to imagine that experience, and my only reference point really is I go to music festivals. Usually, like, we go to one of my favorites is called Desert Hearts. It's a house and techno music festival in San Diego. And you get kind of that same thing where, especially at their festival where it's one stage, everyone is dancing to the same music. And
right. You kind of go into that shared flow state.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're connected on a different level. You'll see the crowd will, move, will begin to move together. All of that. Yes, it is exactly that experience. Because if I was to tell an African that I knew a particular African song, if I say, I know this song, what that would mean is I know how to play every piece on every instrument and every accompaniment for that song. I know the dance for that song. I know the words for that song. I know the spiritual significance of the song and what sort of energetic connection that particular song is supposed to make and what it's supposed to do. That means I know one song. I know accompaniments. I'm only an egg. It's still 4 years in. I would see myself as a novice, even though, strangely, about 6 months into drumming, I was asked to start attending the Dallas Drum Jam, and I've been playing I've been basically learning still, and absorbing this and getting better at it live on stage every week for 4 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's very cool. How do we how do we take what is good about that sort of ritualistic thing, you know, for you, the drumming, for me, the music festival, is that something that you believe can and should be scaled in some way? Is that like how I'm just, because I'm curious, I guess, let me get my thoughts straight. Let me swallow my saliva here and figure out how I want to say this.
Right? Take a deep
In an effort to appease them, I don't know. I believe it's theater, but maybe there's a real desire to be inclusive. They're now requiring all of their employees to include their pronouns in their Slack bios. So now all employees, so I guess my question is, how do we shift that kind of reaction to this to something that is more ritualistic and brings people to the same level? Because maybe I'm not articulating this question very well, but does that stir any thoughts in you? Does that make you see any connection there or have anything to say?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what got us talking about, coming together and having a conversation. Was, I don't think it was that one. It was some other,
I think I made a tweet saying, like, if a straight guy friend ever feels the need to put pronouns in his bio, I'm going to roast him. Right. Something like that.
Yes. And my response was, if you can't tell what my pronouns are, I can't help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there a way to replace that kind of reaction? And, it's like this theatrical thing where now we're going to do something that seems like the right thing instead of actually bringing people together. It's like, don't do this display.
Yeah, you don't need this. Yeah. This little, and that's exactly what it is, right? It is a virtue display. Reasonable. I mean, you definitely want to be not the bigot, right? And you certainly don't want your company destroyed because of, maybe you did have somebody that was like, we don't know the details of that particular thing, but if you've got somebody that's a real problem, then you need to be handling up on that. But I think there's a big focus on this performance. And not only that, but there's this big focus on pretending that you can't tell a man from a woman, right? That you don't know what reality is because there's a very small group of people who don't want you to notice that they're a man or a woman. It's because this isn't, again, this is like an activist community, not a, not not the minority of the minority. But I do think that one of the reasons that the trans people are going to experience pushback is all of this. Now you're making me. And that's one of the things, that's what really got, Jordan Peterson, who's so agreeable, to be like, okay, wait a minute. We can't have like speech required. You can't make people do this. I mean, I would be insulted if you couldn't tell that I was a woman. Right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
thank you for clearing that up. I've been wondering. I was afraid to ask.
Right? But you didn't want to ask.
Yeah.
How those babies came to be.
So do you see? I guess how would you steel man can you steel man? Do you think that the other side deserves to be steel manned of wanting these sorts of classifications to be front and center? Do you think that there is legitimate concern there, or do you see it all as strictly theater?
Well, I mean, I think unless somebody's being unreasonable and they want me to call them something different every other week, if you have some way in which you want me to refer to you, your name, your identity, whatever it is, and I know what that is, it's a reasonable expectation that if you asked me, if I asked you to call me Janice instead of Jan, uh, or if I asked you to call me, Reverend instead of Miss, or whatever it is, I think it's perfectly acceptable for people to be able to do that. It's you, it's your body. You want to be referred to this way, fine. But that doesn't mean that everybody else has to pretend that men and women aren't real. Because it's awfully strange. People who do want to transition, the last thing that a male who wants to be a woman wants to do is erase women. I mean, there's all of that transition. And until quite recently, transition was first you had to go make sure that there wasn't something causing that was like you had some kind of physiological disorder. There was a hormone disorder or something medically that was causing the issue. First you had to go through that. Then you had to go through extensive psychological stuff. Then they had to live at least a year, if not two, as the other sex before they could even begin going through the process of transitioning. So this is something that would take years to do. That is now all of a sudden, well, that girl likes army boots and Tonka trucks.
Yeah.
So
let's let her decide.
Yeah, well, and is it her deciding? If we tell her the reason that she likes army boots and Tonka trucks is that she's a boy. Children are very impressionable, and historically speaking, a lot of the people who were insecure or unsure about their sex when they were little grow into normal homosexual people who just they weren't surrounded by people that recognized
yeah. It's is that Abigail Schreier who is taking heat for those kinds of things, or is it it's Deborah So, Dr. Deborah So, who talks about that, how they grow out of it. Have these sorts of ideas, you mentioned your grandchildren are 9 and 10, is that right? 8 and 9?
My grandchildren are 9, 6, and 3. 2
9,
boys
6, and 3.
And then a girl.
I'm sure they've been exposed to these types of ideas, right? Have you had to have, or your children, their parents had to have discussions with them about this, how this is what's going on in terms of sex and orientation and stuff? I'm just wondering if there's any anecdotal evidence or examples.
Well, I do know that, for instance, my oldest grandson, when my daughter was pregnant with her youngest, my granddaughter, a woman from another country, it had come up to her and rubbed her belly, because this was a very traditional thing. She's just rubbing her belly, she's blessing her baby, and that's what's going on. But my grandson, after the woman left, said to his mom, that woman just came and touched you without asking your permission. Why was it okay for that woman to do that? So it is definitely something that he's thinking about. And of course, we do want to teach our children to respect each other's space, right? And I certainly want to raise boys for whom consent is important, right?
Yeah, for sure. How open are you were you with your children about your experience in college?
Well, as you can see, my son got into his teen years before he even knew that. I talked to my girls when they were younger about personal safety, about the fact that there are people in the world that do not always have your best interest at heart. And they all know. My son, bless him, he's very good at pushing me forward. I was very hesitant about coming forward about things, especially about my own personal experiences. And he said, "Mom, never let me be the reason you're silent about anything."
Wow. It's a very insightful thing to say.
Yeah. And so they know what I've been doing, and they were still, as I was going to college, they were all still around. Now, I only have one still at home. My kids are 29 to 20. But I've also allowed them to have their own experiences. It's certainly not, the all men are bastards thing. I understand why this feeling would come up on occasion, but it's not true. And I was much more interested in being able to teach my children about different strategies and different approaches that people that might be predatory would have, as opposed to the all men are bad. One of my inspirations for coming to college and entering the field of psychology was Dr. David Buss, and his work is on all sorts of murder, suicide, but also human mating strategies, especially short-term and long-term mating strategies, right? And so I have much more of a evolutionary approach, I guess,
Right. Okay.
to discussions of sexuality, even with my kids and grandkids.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the difference is teaching not that not to be afraid, but to be aware and to know what you're looking at, right? To see the world for what it is and to be able to recognize signs. I mean, that's how we survive.
Maintaining situational awareness.
Yeah.
It's very different than, slut shaming girls because they're wearing tank tops. It's a different conversation.
For sure. Well, we're nearing the end of our time. Let's wrap up with, I don't know, I've been trying to think. I really like how some podcasters wrap it up or have their standard questions that they like to ask. So maybe I'll take my first try with you today, Janice, and I appreciate your playing along with me. If there was one thing that you could change about the world we live in to make it a better place, what would that one thing be, and why would you want that to change?
I would create, such a bad word, safe spaces.
No.
And I don't.
We almost went the whole
You're
way
like,
without
what? All the
saying
right-wing followers just went, what? But here's the thing. When I say a safe space, I don't mean a place to go so that you can hide from the world and what's going on. I think that we need spaces that are designed to come together and talk about the disagreeable things, where you can come in ignorance but good intent, and be able to have real conversations about things that are complicated or things that people just flat out disagree on, and be able to come in with the assumption of good intent, and to allow people to make those messy mistakes without getting their career destroyed because they didn't have right think before they walked in the door.
It's like
and
an
I think
unsafe, safe space.
yeah. Yeah, a place where you are legitimately safe, where you can be your worst self and it'll be okay, right? That where we can work through that and then find a way to move forward beyond that. And I do find that in the drumming. I find that, like you said, at your music festivals, that it is a unique way of bringing us into time with each other where we can connect with each other on a deeper level, because that's something that's hardwired into us, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your race is or your sex. The falling into time together works on all of us. And I've seen some people kind of try to create these spaces here and there, but we used to do this at church. Everybody got together and sang the same songs together at church, and everybody knew it. We used to have dances. We used to have, all kinds of rituals where we were in time together with each other. And I think that disconnection is preventing us from having secure attachment. And without that secure attachment to who we are in the world and to the people around us, humans just don't do well. So that's what I do.
I love that. And you could probably have that space and then afterwards do a drumming celebration to shake off any negative feelings that might have arisen from an awkward question or an awkward statement. You could gather people, have them ask questions, tell stories, ask questions of each other, let those difficult topics come up, and then all dance together after.
Well, and share your stories. Share your stories with each other. And it doesn't have to be does your story match what, XYZ of your kind has done, but that you can come forward and that you can tell your stories. And that's what drummers do. That djembe isn't an instrument, it's a library. It's a library. There's languages in Africa that are connected with that drum. If you're within the sound of my djembe, there are people in certain African cultures that if you go and tell them your name, they can drum the history of your family.
Wow, that's really cool. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's a deep connection. I would almost do that before. Like I would come in and I would drum. I would have people tell stories and talk and work things out and find reconciliation, and then then celebrate that we're able to connect on that level, even with people who are not even remotely like us. Like the only thing we share in common is humanity.
That's a big deal. Like that. Yeah, that's a big deal. Is there any chance of getting a little drum sample here to wrap us up?
Oh, no. Come to Dallas on Wednesday night, and then you get the drum sound. No way will I disgrace my teachers by nervously drumming out something inaccurately.
Fair enough. We'll see you in Dallas then.
I know I'm going to have to get over that one, given what I'm writing my thesis about, but I'm not ready yet.
No worries. Next time we'll take the
Next
plunge.
Time I'll prepare myself emotionally.
Yeah. I should have let you know yesterday that was going to be
right. Hey, guess what? I'm sorry. It doesn't really matter what you have to say about the world and all of those other things.
Yeah, we just want to hear the drum.
Just, live on the internet. Here we go. This is what you're going to be known for. Fun from performance.
Next time. Cool. Well, thank you, Janice. I really appreciate it. Did not disappoint. It was very enjoyable for me, and I hope it was for you.
Yeah. Great conversation, and keep up the podcast. I'm enjoying the episodes that I've been that I've been watching. It's a great conversation, and Lord knows the world needs more of that.
Yeah. And more drumming. Apparently.
And more drumming, more dancing. You know, you can dance alone in your room. It's fine.